You know, there's some things in the Bible that I really enjoy because they are reminders that we are all human. One of the reasons I actually love when Jesus was flipping over the tables in the temple because of the merchants, and you got to understand the context of that, The typical thing was to bring a sacrifice to the temple. If you're poor or whatever, then you bring a sparrow because that's all you can afford to bring, but you bring something. If you can bring a whole ox or whatever, a whole bovine, then you're doing pretty well. Now, the thing is that you're supposed to bring it from your homestead. You're supposed to bring it all the way there. But the merchants were setting up booths in not outside, inside the temple, so that people could show up and be like, "Yo, let me buy a calf, and then I'll go sacrifice it." All in one inside the temple. Jesus was not cool with that, obviously. I mean, he spent 3 hours braiding a bull whip before he went and did it. It wasn't just an impulsive thing. I just want to point that out. I feel like that there's context and that matters. Also, he didn't use the bull whip on the people. He was just using it to crack it to scare the animals so that they would cause a ruckus and make everyone leave. But, nonetheless, I think it suffices me to say that Christ was in his anger in that moment. He wasn't feeling anger, he was in his anger. The Bible even says that there are times when God the Father Almighty on his throne of power is in his anger at times. I think that emotions are important. There's a reason that we have them. Don't be a slave to them, but don't ignore them either. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, my favorite prophet, although I will admit Isaiah is probably the most important prophet, my favorite is Elijah because he had anger management problems. 2 stories that I love about Elijah. Maybe 3, maybe 4. I don't know. We're going to talk about Elijah. There was some servants of Baal. They were trying to be like, Baal's cool and your God sucks, Elijah. Your God's dumb and stupid and it isn't real, but Baal is super real. So Elijah's like, okay, let's go out into the wilderness and pray and to our gods, and we'll see who answers, okay? Multiple priests of Baal go out into the wilderness and they're walking in a circle and like they're flagellating themselves, they're cutting their own heads, making themselves bleed. And the whole time that's going on, Elijah's like chilling with a bag of Doritos and some Mountain Dew, off to the side, just like, yeah, y'all been doing this for 2 hours. Nothing's happened yet. Maybe I think Baal sucks, actually. I think Baal's a loser. Wow. Or maybe you guys just aren't are trying to appease him enough. I think you guys should go even harder. He's just egging them on. They end up walking in this circle, cutting themselves, screaming and crying out for so long that they can't stand anymore, and they all collapse off to the side. And their footsteps, because they're stamping ritually, are so intense, they have formed like an indentation, a donut indentation in the very ground itself. And after they can do no more, Elijah stands up, licks the seasoning off his fingers, and is like, y'all done? Y'all satisfied? Ball didn't answer you. Your beach ball didn't answer you, idiots. You freaking losers. Morons. You fools. Y'all want to see something cool? Go get some water and pour it into that indentation that your own footsteps have wrought. Make a moat of water. Fill it completely. You're going to do it. I'm not going to touch it. You guys are. So they go get some water and they pour it in there, and now there's a little ring of water there. And Elijah kneels down and he's just like, "Oh, Almighty God, show these blasphemous idolaters your almighty and infinite power. And then fire falls down from the sky and makes the water catch on fire. The water caught on fire and burned. The water burned. The water caught on fire. You can't actually do that, by the way. It doesn't make any sense. You can't do that. But God makes the rules, and God's almighty. So, oh, look. Who's God's real, idiots? Now that you're all a bloody mess on the ground of your own choices, you can sit here and bleed and writhe and continue to watch the fire of the Almighty God burn the water. And remember your transgressions and know that He is God and your God is a piece of garbage. And so are all your beliefs, idiots. I'm going back to town for some dinner. Bye. Elijah had no chill. He gave no F's, bro. What a boss. And he did all this wearing animal skins. I think that's a point that needs to be brought up, is like Old Testament prophets, they had to rely on God for all things. They weren't allowed to wear linen. They were not allowed to wear textile fabrics that the hands of man had wrought. So Elijah's doing all this with like a bear skin over his loins, probably a wolf skin and a wolf head draped over his shoulder, looking like a straight Viking lord badass. Gosh, Elijah freaking owns, dude. And there's more. There's so much more. I love Elijah. I want to make that clear. I love Elijah. He's my dude, bro. There was another time as he's leaving a city. There was some punk brat teenagers with loose tongues, no morals, and a lack of understanding. And they told Elijah, "Go on up, you old baldy," which is basic modern day. That's saying, "Kill yourself, bald moron." They told a prophet of God to kill himself. So Elijah, who's like, I'm the prophet of God. I'm the mouthpiece of God. God's not going to stand for you talking bad about his prophet. You're not allowed to do that, actually. So Elijah points at them. And with all these other people, there was a lot of other people around. You have to understand, there were many people around. People coming in and out of the city, people meeting, people saying farewells. Jesus famously met that young man who wanted to bury his father, and Jesus told him, "Let the dead bury themselves. If you're going to follow me, then do it now." There was stuff that happened outside of city gates frequently. It was a gathering spot. It was like the old version of a mall. There's a lot of people there. And Elijah points just at these reprehensible, punk-ass teenage mutants. And he tells them, "May a bear maul you to death." And they start laughing. Some other people probably start laughing too, because maybe chortling a little. But Elisha, bears don't exist in this region. For like 250 miles in any given direction, there aren't any bears here. That's why we built the city here, because it's safe from the wilderness and the wild animals. And then, almost like Hermione in Harry Potter when she's messing with the time twister, a bear just appears from behind a bush. It transmogrifies into existence out of nowhere. It comes up, it starts roaring and charging at these punk teenagers, slams their heads into the ground, rakes his terrible claws through their chests and their stomach, crunches its jaws across their bones until they turn into a flour-like powder, mixing with their blood and flesh into a freaking paste. It doesn't eat them. It doesn't consume them for food or nutrients, nor does it harm any of the other people around. This bear that is not indigenous to the region, that should not be there, appeared as soon as Elijah spoke those words and kill ass the crap out of those punk ass kids. I'm sure some people would say that's not very Christian, but what do you know, huh? Christians aren't your footstools and your foot mask to smear the mud on your feet across. And I also, for one, will not stand nor tolerate someone speaking ill of my Lord and God. And I think Elijah summoning a bear with the power of God to trash some fools is one of the funniest and coolest things I've ever heard of in my entire life. And you know, God wasn't too displeased with him after that, because he remained a prophet. There was a time there was some, salacious woman trying to cause sedition inside the city. She did not like Elijah, and so she tells a bunch of people at her party that she gets drunk. I don't like Elijah. He makes me mad. I think you guys should kill him. That sound like modern day, because some things never change. You know what I'm saying? The word of the Lord comes to Elijah and tells him, you need to leave the city. So he flees about 128 miles to the east, climbs all the way to the top of the mountain range, and then continues traveling about another 200 miles to the north along the ridge of the mountain range. And the whole time he is doing this, every morning that he goes to sleep on top of the mountain range, like an ascetic monk or something. No tent, no bed. He just goes to sleep on the land. And he wakes up every day to a pile of meat and a pile of breadcrumbs. Because God commanded the crows and the ravens and the scavengers of the desert to go pick carrion off of corpses that have been baking in the desert sun with just enough salinity in the air from the desert winds to preserve this meat and prevent it from rotting, which is amazing. You can eat bone marrow out of corpses in the Alaskan tundra, by the way. If you're ever in a survival situation, you can actually take old bones of carcasses and boil them, and the bone marrow will turn into a really nutrient-rich, protein-filled soup. You can survive off of carcasses if you have to. Just FYI. And seriously, meat and bread every morning for breakfast. Little bits of carne asada, seasoned with the desert winds and the sun baking and cooking them. And then I assume these crows just took a bunch of bread from merchants and from the city and all that. And then they flew hundreds of miles with a single crumb of bread between their beaks that they did not swallow or eat nor try to hide. They flew it all the way exactly to where Elijah was and put it down in a neat little pile for him to eat, because God is that cool. And you got to have something to drink. You got to hydrate. God caused a little spring and a little river of water to flow at the top of a mountain where there is no snow. A little river appeared right next to Elijah. Every morning, let me have some bread. Oh, let me get some water. Oh, this meat. Oh, the protein. Oh, man, that tastes so good. Oh, God fueled me and sustained me. God has given me something to eat, just like he gave manna in the desert to the Exodus. Time to walk another 20 miles north and then find a safe place to take a nap again for the next day. And then when Elijah is, going through his journey, there's that awesome part where it mentions the cloud. When, that was the moment when God was performing the miracle of the river on top of the mountain for him. He woke up a little early, and, it's like the kids seeing their dad in the Santa Claus costume, putting the presents down type deal. He woke up a little early, and the cloud of God's splendor preventing anyone from seeing him, which is spoken of many times, he was just enveloped. The top of the mountain was enveloped by the cloud of God's darkening cloud, But anyway, he finally comes down from the mountain range. He goes a couple 100 miles to the west, and he comes to the gates of another city. And there he finds the woman and her son. And he comes up to her and is like, "Woman, why are you so sad?" And she says, "Good sir, I know that you are a man of God just by your dress." Because again, the prophets wore animal skins and furs. "I am about to use my last thimble full of olive oil and this last handful of flour to bake bread cakes for me and my son, and we will eat, and then we will go out into the wilderness to die, for there is nothing left in this world for us, and we can survive no more." And Elijah's just like, "Believe ye in the power of God?" And the woman is like, "Well, I know that you're a man of God, and if you say God will do something, I know it will be." And so Elijah tells her, he picks up her little pot of olive oil, and I'm sure he can feel like there's some olive oil in there, but yeah, there's not much. And your flour, I can feel there's not a lot in there. But he tells her, "If ye believe in the Lord, that he shall preserve ye in thy life and thy son's life, then your oil and your flour will never run out. By the way, I really need a place to stay. You got an upstairs room in your house that I can I've been sleeping on mountains for a while. I would really like to sleep on a straw bed. You got one upstairs? Yeah? Cool. Let me stay with you. And for as long as I am with you, your olive oil and your flour will never run out." And every morning, this woman would take her pitcher and pour out a little olive oil and mix it with some flour, make some dough, and then bake some bread cakes so that her and her son could survive for the next day. And for months, there's always more olive oil. There's always another handful of flour in her bag of flour. And every morning she feels in there like, I have touched the bottom of the bag. There's no more flour in here. But then the next morning, there's another handful of flour in there. And every morning there's just enough olive oil for her to make more dough and make more unleavened bread. There was only enough there for one last serving of bread. And yet through her faith, she and her son were sustained and had enough to eat for a very long time. When the world had turned their backs on them and no one would support them, God supported them through his power and their faith and belief in him. And then Elijah had a disciple, Elisha. And there was a point when the two of them were walking along the road, and Elijah told Elisha, "Hey, my time is up. God's going to come pick me up. So because you have never complained and you've never talked back against anything I've ever asked you to do, because you have been perfectly obedient, ask anything of me and I will make it so. And God will make it so." You know what I'm saying? And so Elisha says, "I want a double portion of the power that God has given you." And Elijah's like, "Then it will be so. You will be twice as great as me in terms of the power that God has granted me. You will have a twofold portion." Anyway, my flaming chariot is here and I gotta go, so do what you gotta do, my friend. Peace be with you. Elijah didn't die. Elijah never tasted death. He was allowed to enter the kingdom of God's heavenly paradise without having to die because the flaming chariot came and picked him up. And then Elisha, my favorite thing Elisha ever did is he was walking along the road, going to preach the word. And along the road, there's some people with their pickaxes quarrying stones to bring them back for gravel. And there's this one dude, he raises his pickaxe up overhead, and the metal head comes loose and flies off the wooden shaft. And it goes straight into a deep river, a fast-moving deep river. No one can dive down to the bottom of it. And this dude despairs. And he begins to cry and sob and weep. And Elisha comes up to him and just says, "Brother, the Lord is near. For what reason have you to despair as greatly as you do? Whatever the reason, God will correct it." And this dude tells him, well, my like 15-pound iron pickaxe head just fell to the bottom of the river. And that's what I'm using to earn money to feed my family. And without that pickaxe, me and my family will starve to death, and we're all going to die. So, yeah, I'm a little upset right now, dude. And Elisha is just like, "Believe ye in the power of God?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, I do." And he's like, "All right, then your faith will be sufficient. Come, behold." He goes over to a tree, breaks off a stick, picks off all the leaves and the buds from it until it is simply a stick. And again, this is a moving river. He just, limp wrist, like, tosses the stick twig branch into the water. And although the water is moving, the stick remains still and in place. And then the twig, made of wood, begins to sink in the water. Straight down until it touches the iron axe head. And then the twig remains sitting at the bottom of the river as the iron axe head then floats like a piece of wood to the surface of the water and then is gently pushed as if by unseen hands toward the shore, where he is able to pick it up again and he can take it back into town and get his pickaxe repaired. And Elijah's just like, "See? The power of God can do all things. However, it is your faith in his power that makes the miracle come true. Be of good cheer, brother. Everything's going to be all right. God is awesome, and he is merciful, and he loves you." So Elijah, he was super cool, but he also created another one of the greatest prophets of all time, Elisha. Elisha was a lot more in control of his anger. He was a lot more merciful and compassionate toward people. And he went around teaching people that the miracles and the blessings of God aren't just some thing that randomly befalls upon you. They are a direct product of your faith. And I think that that's a really important and amazing lesson. Anyway, thanks for listening to me barf about the Bible and ancient prophets of the old times. I like talking about it. It's one of my favorite things, actually. So, thanks for listening. God bless y'all. Peace out. Later.